The out-of-Africa theory was proposed in the 19th century by several scholars, including Darwin, and remained an assumption all the way through the missing link era of evolutionary studies. With the emergence of the civil rights movement in the 1960s, this theory gained a great deal of steam due to the proposed idea that all humans evolved from Africa. In 1968, a lawsuit filed against the state of Arkansas by the ACLU, who had selected Susan Epperson, a biology teacher, to challenge the teaching of creationism in schools. Around the same time, it began to be proposed that Neanderthals were a separate branch of species and not a part of modern humans. From that point on, Americans and countries around the world began teaching evolution in schools as opposed to the traditional Christian idea of intelligent design. The out-of-Africa theory, as traditionally proposed, was that Homo sapiens are an independent species that migrated out of Africa between 70,000 and 50,000 years ago and replaced every other population of hominid on Earth either via violent means or by overtaking the resources in the area and forcing them into extinction. From the beginning, there have been many problems with the out-of-Africa theory, with the first appearance of modern humans being all the way in Australia and many anomalies popping up in Europe and Asia as well. The final nail in the coffin was after unveiling genomic sequence data, it was shown that the DNA of Neanderthals, Denisovans, and at least 2 other species were present in modern humans. This doesn't mean that Homo sapiens didn't migrate out of Africa, since we know they did at least 3 times, but we don't know if they were there first or migrated back in and out several times. For example, the HLD6 skull recently found in China is reported to be from a 300,000-year-old anatomically modern human, and in Greece, 210,000-year-old remains have been found as well. For fear of their research being discredited, and likely for political reasons, proponents of the original out-of-Africa model have continually attempted to modify and update the model while still maintaining the out-of-Africa name. In reality, there is no longer any reason to continue to call it such. Although the out-of-Africa theory is incorrect as it has been proposed, we can still assume that the early development from primates to early hominids originated in Africa. However, there are even challenges to this concept, since what could possibly be the earliest known common ancestor between chimps and early hominids might be Gracopithecus, which was a 7.2 million-year-old specimen found in Greece. Based on archaeological evidence and DNA research, we now have to assume that hominid species have been interbreeding and migrating to different degrees across the globe for the entirety of human evolution. This means that in reference to the latest migration out of Africa, it wasn't just us migrating out of Africa to meet Neanderthals, it was more like us migrating out of Africa to meet us. We have to shed the old idea of the stupid caveman Neanderthal and start looking at them and their achievements as our own. If we look at archaeological evidence from this perspective, it starts to seem as if maybe we learn more from them than we think. Based on evidence, I would propose that behavioral modernity emerged from the interbreeding between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, and here's why. In the Brunequel Cave near Toulouse in southwest France, archaeologists made an astonishing discovery. Deep into the cave, some 330 meters, built from stalagmites snapped off the cave floor, stood 7 stone circles. These enigmatic structures were 175,000 years old and were built by Neanderthals, long before humans were said to be in Europe. This discovery brings up the possibility and likelihood that Neanderthals were the first to definitively develop religion. Another development that cannot be overlooked is the production of tools. According to most experts, Neanderthal tools appear to be superior to that of the Homo sapien contemporaries. The Neanderthals were the producers of the Mysterian tool industry, while Homo sapiens were still using the more archaic Acheulean industry. If we look at the generally accepted progression of hominid tools, the Mysterian was traditionally listed as an advancement upon the Acheulean. The Mysterian tool industry was exclusively Neanderthal, and the industries that preceded it, the Chattoperonian and the Aterian, would give rise to what would be called the Aurignacian and Gravettian periods, which is the point when we see the famous cave paintings and advanced structure of the Upper Paleolithic. When we look at the development of tools in the Pleistocene, the process from primitive to more advanced goes as follows. The Acheulean, the Mysterian, Chattoperonian, Aterian, Aurignacian, and Gravettian. This would imply that behavioral modernity arose from the interbreeding, or at the very least the intermingling of Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. We also know that Neanderthals made boats and have little evidence that Homo sapiens did. An interesting side note is that the later Western hunter-gatherers in Scandinavia likely practiced a religion heavily centered around boats. The migration event that we would classically associate with the out-of-Africa theory was simply a group of Homo sapiens who encountered Neanderthals in the Middle East and interbred with them. This group would eventually give rise to the Aurignacian period and thus behavioral modernity in the advanced culture of Cro-Magnon man. These people then moved east to India and Australia, while another branch moved to Europe. This intermixing would have been happening during the Aurignacian and Aterian tool industry periods. The Mediterranean seems to be the birth of modern humanity, as the majority of early development was taking place near Morocco and the Levant. The Mediterranean sea level was much lower at this time, making it less of an obstacle than it is today. We should now be looking at human evolution through this lens. From the point that Homo erectus emerged, there was a continual shift and mixing of different groups of humans across the world, with certain populations moving into new areas and intermixing or killing off the local group. At roughly 40,000 years before present, something extraordinary happens, and a group local to Europe becomes behaviorally modern. So why would it be that Neanderthals have been the key factor in making us human? Climate plays a big role in this, and several scholars such as J. Philippe Rushton have pointed out that a cold climate selects for a slow life history strategy for survival, producing a need to plan ahead and develop new technologies such as clothing. Brain size also increases in higher latitudes. We can assume that Neanderthals would have had lighter skin to absorb more vitamin D, a larger brain, and would have been well adapted to the colder climate. We do know that higher IQ doesn't necessarily lead to higher innovation. For example, Northeast Asians live in a cold climate and have higher IQ, but do not produce innovation as they are always on the edge of survival. This is key to understanding the Neanderthal situation, considering it would have been very similar. It took the influx of population from Homo sapiens to allow for easier survival and more outliers in the gene pool before innovation could occur. The cold climate would have selected for Neanderthals to be, in ecological terms, a K strategist. The warm climate would have selected for the Homo sapiens to be R strategists. A K strategist has a slow life history which results in more investment in child rearing, higher trust, and higher group cooperation. The incoming Homo sapiens would have been R strategists or fast life history strategists, with higher tendencies towards sexual reproduction and less investment in child rearing due to the warmer climate of Africa. This makes sense as to why we were not predominantly Neanderthals today, as they would have simply outbred the Neanderthals. This is still the case today, as warmer climates tend to have higher birth rates than colder climates. Even though we are not genetically majority Neanderthal today, there are parts of us that still display characteristics of them and their culture. We know that there are certain health and physical characteristics that we inherit from them, but could there be more? Could religions such as those associated with the Indo-Europeans and Neolithic farmers have originated in Neanderthal culture? Could the higher IQ of modern populations that have Neanderthal DNA be due to their adaptation to colder climate and a larger brain? Are there certain body types and other physical traits that are more genetically Neanderthal? As more DNA research comes out, we may have to rewrite parts of our haplogroup tree model, since it is centered around the out-of-Africa theory. To date, we do not have a definitive Y haplogroup associated with Neanderthals. Some research has been done to try and determine whether or not any Neanderthal haplogroups still remain, and differing opinions have arisen out of the results. It could be the case that haplogroup I or its root IJ is Neanderthal, or that the mutation that created this haplogroup is Neanderthal derived. There's not much evidence of this as of now, but the future could shed light on this idea.